Hey, everybody. It's a new adventure every week around here. We are welcoming you once again to our exploration into the technical and the advanced. We got so much, and this is a big subject. So if you've noticed, if you followed us for a few episodes, we kind of tackle a little bit in one subcategory, then we go to another subcategory. And you're going to find all these things in our archives so you can review and you can be able to find out how they sort of tie together, because they do. The fields of computers and biochemistry are merging in some very, very interesting ways. So let's just get our initial comments out of the way, which includes our community guidelines disclaimer. And our video and our channel in general may contain certain copyrighted works that were not specifically authorized to be used by the copyright holder, but which we believe in good faith are protected by federal law and the fair use doctrine for one or more reasons noted in the Copyright Act of 1976. The points of view and purpose of this video is not to incite fear or violence or harass or bully in any way. It's all about education. It's all about being interested in exploring and stretching our imaginations with other like-minded individuals curious about the subject. This encourages conversation, awareness, and all kinds of good stuff. The opinions expressed on this stream belong solely to the person expressing them and are not a specific representation of the channel Cyberhuman Frontiers. The video does not claim to give medical, legal, political, or financial advice. So, TMC, how are you tonight?
Trying to find the window. I'm doing good, Andy.
Find a window. Okay. If it's on a first floor, go ahead and jump out. If it's 2 or 3 stories up, I would second. I would just.
Yeah, right. Context is everything.
Yeah,
I had to scroll back over to unmute.
Brilliant comment. Context is everything. I think we can get some mileage out of that in the discussion tonight.
That will be the indirect object of the exercise. I'm ready.
Yeah. All right. So. As we get to the more into the meat of the discussion tonight, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on electromagnetics and capacitive effect, but a little bit of introduction. So I'm kind of just sort of setting the table and setting a foundation for the kind of interplay between technology and biomolecules that is really going on. And I think maybe you've seen some of this, maybe you haven't. Some of the graphics that I put up, I will apologize. They're sort of not quite the right size, so they'll be a little foggy, but I've put the links in the show notes below the show. You'll be able to follow those and get a higher resolution picture on your own machine. In the area of the field specifically, where electromagnetics and the associated effects, such as induced capacitance, can achieve a result of altering the state of a biological system. And it could be a molecule. It could be the conformation, which is the folding of a protein. It could be opening an ion channel. It could be a whole variety of things. And TMC is going to be taking the reins as we get into it with the patents, and he'll really he'll get into some good detail on this stuff. The possibilities as the applications are perfected, honestly, could have staggering impact on realigning living tissues away from things like disease or other forms of malfunction and toward health, as well as other possibilities. So as we go forward on this episode, let's keep thinking in the background. Hopefully you've been with us on some of the previous shows, and you can watch them if you want to review. Let's keep thinking about magnetism, electromagnetism, nanoparticles, magnetic nanoparticles, magnetogenetics, and then we're going to start illustrating more with this additional nuance that we're going to be getting into tonight. Don't forget, you can go to the website. We've got links there for you. We have a backup channel with archived videos on Rumble, and we'll experiment with streaming on there at some point too in the future. Not quite ready for that yet, but we're getting ready. And don't forget, go to Human Internet, https:// and check out what's there. So good stuff. Anyway, I'm going to start off computer logic in microbial systems. All right, computer logic and microbial systems. Let me get this thing sized a little bit better. It's not quite the way I want it. Okay. An example of applied genetic programming is the picture that you see up above. I'm not even going to get into that because I want to read. This is by Jeremy Moore. He states, synthetic biology, and that's a mouthful in itself. Synthetic biology is quickly evolving in such a way that it combines the sciences of molecular biology and biochemistry with engineering. One major task for synthetic biologists is harnessing the cell's innate ability to perform tightly concerted metabolic processes in order to produce molecules of industrial and medical relevance. Okay, so this is all about gaining control over the machinery that is in every cell in our bodies. In other words, one goal of synthetic biology is to create a programming language for cellular processes that can be altered with great precision to generate microbes with specific functions. Applying computer logic, and I'm going to show you some pictures, to living systems is challenging as gene regulation is highly sensitive to the environment and requires tightly controlled balance of regulatory factors. Translation on that is, if you go into a body, an organism, it already kind of knows how it wants to naturally be. And if anything out of its expected parameters based on its nature start to happen, it will resist. So it's a little bit more of a challenge to get in there and to get into a cell's machinery and not have it, declare war on the invader or just die. It could even kill the cell. So anyway, programmable cells have myriad applications in industry, from industry to medicine. And he gives an example, and I'm just going through this by way of overview. Yersinia pseudotuberculosis was equipped with synthetic genetic circuits that allowed it to detect changes in several environmental factors. So that's basically a bacterium. And in the presence of certain environmental factors, the strain expressed a protein that allowed it to invade mammalian cells. So what he's talking about here is, based on changes in the environment, it made that particular pseudotuberculosis more or less infectious. Interesting. And we want you to connect lots of dots in the background. There are lots of things that we don't say because we don't want to be too controversial. And of course, we wouldn't want our videos to be taken down or banned. And remember, this is for entertainment purposes only. So we want you to be entertained as well as learn. Now, this is probably the best diagram of this that I'm going to get, but in my set of slides, this is a little bit further ahead than my initial one. So I will go to my little slideshow. TMC, any comments yet at this point?
No.
And what you got here is you have a synthetic protein, and you're seeing almost in the shape of what is, diagrammatically, it almost looks like Lego pieces. There are labs that are able to design purpose-built proteins, synthetic proteins that will do a targeted job in a cell or a bacterium, and it could be in a human cell, a mouse cell, monkey cell, anything you want. All right. Now, what does this start off with? I'm going to try to merge two subjects together. We go to slide number 2. This is the simplest iteration of a piece of one tiny segment of a computer. All right. We have the addressing coming along. We have a switch. The transistor is a switch. We have the bit line. We also have a clock running here, all right, which keeps everything on a time. And that controls when the gate opens, which is the transistor. And then, depending on what was coming along, we store that value in something. Now, if you can, in your mind's eye, if you can imagine that all of these functions can be done in biological molecules rather than in silicon and transistors. So that's just basic. Next diagram. it gets a little more complicated. So you had a simple gate right there. That was an on-off gate with storage, all right? Simple gate, of which in your computer and in your smartphone, there are millions of these gates and millions of these little storage things, which would be equivalent to memory storage, bits of memory storage, how many gigabits, etc. Okay, now we get a little bit more complicated. I'm going to try and make this thing a little bit bigger. It went a little small. I haven't figured out how to use my photo viewer yet, but I will, don't worry. So we have a whole sequence of AND gates that are daisy-chained and put into a matrix here. And if you can envision that back on the other diagram, which was just a single little gate, that it's really just a matter of scaling and doing it with biological molecules to make more gates and then wire them or cluster them or arrange them in such a way that they work in groups. So now we start forming some sort of a logic array, all right? Keep thinking biomolecules, keep thinking biomolecules. All right, now we get a little bit more into it. Let's see if I can go a little bigger on this. Ooh, that's nice. I'd like to push the envelope here a little bit. Ooh, okay, very nifty. All right, so here we have combo. This is a combination. You could have made this central block of this thing out of silicon if you wanted to, but they're also working on making these gates out of biomolecules. So what we have on the outside, on the input side, we have sensors of a variety of sorts, all right? We have perhaps chemical sensors, thermal sensors, resistive sensors. We could have capacitive sensors, light sensors, I just banged on the table, light sensors, or even electromagnetic sensors. And we'll add one more dimension to that. There can be a frequency going on of these inputs going into this processor, all right? This could be made either way, out of silicon or not. And then what we have after the processing occurs, based on both the timing and the type of inputs coming in, we get output out of the thing. And that goes out to things like actuators. You remember last week's episode, we actually showed a nano-sized actuator. It kind of looked like a submicroscopic mousetrap almost. So outputs can then be channeled to, they can be reported right out of the organism, or those outputs can be routed to another part of the organism, and they can do things like they can alter the phenotype, which is the expression of the cell. Genotype is what's in the programming. Phenotype is what the cell actually looks like after the genotype was executed in the code. So anyway, go on to the next one. Now, get a little bit more complex here. So I'm just going to read this one because this is kind of nice. I don't think I can enlarge it too much without having it go off the screen, but I'm going to try because we like to push the envelope here. Yeah, it's good. Okay. All right. So, okay. In this biological AND gate, the input proteins X and Y bind to and deactivate different copies of the gene that encodes protein R. Okay, excuse me. I won't really lose my voice. Okay, so we have here protein X, we have protein Y. Depending on which one of these proteins does what, and once again, these were going to be purpose designed, they will either activate or inhibit these genes from doing whatever it is that they're going to do, which is in this case, coding for another protein, R. Follow it through. This protein, in turn, deactivates the gene for protein Z, because that's what's in the genetic code of this little hunk of DNA. So they know what one piece of DNA is going to be affected by if they hit it with protein X. They know what's going to happen if another section gets hit by protein Y. That's going to give specific outputs. It will actually, that gene will actually produce protein outputs. Those will then combine and do something else to yet another gene. This can get very, very, very complicated, but we have very, very, very powerful computers. Yeah, TMC, what do you got?
This is binary, right? So what you're talking about is a binary system that's utilizing genetics in order to systematically and reliably achieve an intended outcome.
Precisely.
Using genetics.
Precisely. Yep. And that's why they're calling this a digital cell circuit. So here's one, and I won't get into the numbers. Let's not bury ourselves in what the size of nanoparticles are, because they are really wicked small. And let's not get into how much code there is in our DNA, because it's wicked huge. But when you have really good computers, you can handle this stuff.
All right. So here, leave this up for a second. So let's take this to a hypothetical completion here, right? Digital cell circuit. Imagine for a moment genetics inserted into an organism so sophisticated that you get this picture occurring multiple times, one after another, and the sophistication of the genetics that's been inserted will make sure that one process happens before the next, so that it happens in order. Yes. And once the first process is done, those genetics either go away or they have been transformed to be used later. So it's not necessarily a one and done. And this is where you get into the sophistication of circuitry. Think for a moment how sophisticated circuitry is in something like a phone or a watch, and understand how the conductive traces that are laid into the circuit board and ultimately into the housing and all of the mechanical structures, if you will, that attach all of the pieces and the sensors, everything that is conductive inside of the device.
Can I add something in there? Part of its design and part of its environmental inputs. When you put the two together, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So we're talking about potentially triggers and activators and or new components being brought in, which is a whole nother layer. So this doesn't all have to happen right away. This digital cell circuit could be for construction of something in a biological, but it could also be to maintain and or sustain some behavior or some function. A state. Yep, exactly. Right. Maintain or sustain. So you can build something or maintain and sustain an intent or a function or an action. With a digital cell circuit, in the same manner, conceptually speaking, that you would be able to use the same concepts, cross-apply it to like a cell phone, a computer, a server, a router, digital electronics of any type, right? And that's the intent, is to translate the sophistication of the beauty that is architecturally designed iPhone, right? Everything that goes into that, the architectural design of an iPhone. Well, all of that money, R&D, energy, love, passion, whatever you want to call it. Now take that premise and apply that amount of energy and resource and talent to doing the same thing in your body to achieve the same function, a single unified operating system that allows for a fluid, seamless experience, so long as that operating system, the integrity of that operating system is maintained. And we all know that an Apple operating system, there's no other way. It's either Apple's way or no other way. And that is also analogous to what I see personally, what I see coming forward, is this corporatized, monolithic, top-down structure where the digital genetics, if you will, that hybridization will occur and have the appearance, of a distributed architecture, so that countries, if you will, have the perception that they have the security and the ability to do as they please with their digital biological cell networks. But that is not the Chinese model. Quite frankly, it is not the Western model either. So it is ignorant to think that as we transform the human species into whatever the transhuman future looks like, and I don't endorse that, but this is the trajectory we are currently on. How does Apple work? How does Google work? How does Amazon work? How does Huawei, how does China work? How do these companies that are the dominant, Facebook, another one, Microsoft, another one, how do these dominant entities that really are the public hands that wield power, right? How do they function today? And how is that going to look when this stuff is manifest in your organ systems Right, right. That's exactly what I wanted to get to. And this is just a brief interjection. I hope that you continue. Let's zoom out and then zoom back in again. Just to frame the orientation of this, everything in, whether it's life molecules or something that we built out of steel and silicon, is designed for a purpose. It's built for a purpose. Now, life has designed itself, or it's been created by the creator in such a way that it's got purposes and it's got an intent and it's got a nature about, we sum it all up and call it its nature. Everything is there for a purpose. So what we're showing you at the microscopic level is things that very gifted, talented engineers are designing to get down way, way, way down. And now we're zooming back in from 40,000 feet, way down to that tiny level to be able to interact and affect the state or condition of things or build things at submicroscopic scale. And always, I mean, we all know this. I doubt that anybody that's going to watch this is naive to think that, you know, any organization, institution, or company that's spending huge resources building stuff like this, that they're just doing it for fun, that they have no purpose. So at both the microscope, we're looking at the microscopic size of the purposes of life molecules, and then how they've built little structures that alter that. And then we zoom back out to where what all the comments that you were just making, which is the intent of companies that are building this stuff is something that we should make ourselves well aware of and well informed of at all times, because it can be stupendous and it can be stupendously dangerous. I'm just saying that for entertainment purposes only. Do you want to continue on with what you had going? No,
I think this is a good sort of segue, bridging last show with hopefully where we get with this show. And this will blend nicely with what I was looking up.
Well, let me go to the next panel. All right. Because it builds up. It's got a couple of summary things. It's almost comical at the end. All right. So that was that one. All right. And we're just looking literally just at a single digital gate circuit right there. And make no mistake, your Intel processor has millions of these gates in it. And anyway, so next panel. Hang on. Where'd my next panel go? There we go. This is the one. I purposely put the link to this in the show notes so that you'd be able to see it better. This one isn't going to enlarge real well, and I wish it did. Yeah, we'll try. It's going to get blurry on me. Okay. So here now, I think it was either 3 or 4, maybe 5 episodes ago, we were talking about people in basically either entry-level college or advanced high school laboratories were building plasmids. They were programming life molecules, all right? And it was only about 2,000 coded sets. So it wasn't a whole lot of code. And it was a circular loop of genetic material. And it was in plasmids. So this is just one more illustration of what you have up above. You have a genetic representation of it and 2 different things. One of them is one designed plasmid, which is the equivalent of a circuit in this case. And the other one is a different designed plasmid with a different purpose. And now they give you the analogous circuit diagram of the 2. And what's really amazing about this is, I mean, I'm an old electronics guy. This is basically an oscillator. It goes into one state, and then an output from one turns the input of the other one to inhibit it, and that turns the other one on. And so one turns on, the other one turns off. Then the first one that turned off turns on, and it goes boop, boop, on, off, on, off. They've actually designed with living molecules an oscillator. And that is what this depiction is. If there's anybody watching who's got some of that engineer or was a technician like me, you'll immediately recognize what this is. All right. So anyway, there we go. Oscillator. Fantastic. Now we go next. Now we start looking at, and this one got a little bit bigger than I wanted, but let's see what's up. Okay, there we go. This is a representation of different types of gates in the solid state world, in the electronics world, and the associated waveforms that you will get out of it when you run that circuit. When you give it its input, you know what you're going to get coming out. Different types, AND gates, NOR gates. There should have been a NOT gate here. I guess they don't have a NOT gate on this. No, they don't. They don't. But all you'd have to do would be to put an inverter on the output end of this thing and couple two of them together, and you could get that. So this is distinctly different from that previous diagram, which was an oscillator. This is logic gates, and these are the wave shapes that you'll get out of them. So keeping in mind that these have all been built with biomolecules now, which is utterly amazing. Okay, now we get a little bit more complex. This one is just plain a big diagram to begin with. And the link to this is also out there for you. And you know what? I'm not going to go through all this. All I want to try to just bring to you here is that there is a whole lot of complexity with this. And this is, and you actually can go to their website. This is celldesigner.org. All right. Celldesigner.org is in the business of creating logic functions in biomolecules. And they may even have some, like if you told them what type of a logic array that you wanted, they might even be able to make the building blocks of that and it as biomolecules and mail it out to you. They just might be able to. I haven't visited their site yet, but I encourage you to because it really might be amazingly interesting. At the very bottom of this, we see Boolean logic gates, and that's a little bit of a summary of what was going on from up above. So there's how they do it, the actual machinery of how they do it up above with each of the segments of each one of those biomolecule segments, and then kind of a flow chart at the bottom of what they're trying to do. Okay, moving on. This is an example of one type of input of energy. And input of energy in this case is ultraviolet radiation. And when they hit this particular type, I think that these are bacteria, either that or they could be nanoparticles. I'm not even sure which they are. I think that they're bacteria. And when they hit them, they've designed these bacteria. And when they hit them with UV radiation, they behave in one way, and when they don't hit them with UV radiation, they don't have the trigger and they don't react. So you see in this bottom Petri dish, there are certain ones that have been modified, and they show up immediately as reacting to the UV input, and the other ones don't. Next diagram. Try to enlarge this a little bit. This is a nice one-to-one correspondence between. And why did it run off the edge here? Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay. TMC, do you want to take us through this diagram? This is just really cool. You know, we have the analog.
You're doing great. You're doing great. Go ahead.
Analog between all of the electronic components that I knew and loved so much as a teenager when I learned all kinds of electronics. I've got coils. I've got resistors. I've got capacitors. Then I have gates. I have an op amp. That little, I'll try to enlarge it. It might go right off the chart, but okay, yeah. That's an op amp. It has a non-inverting input and an inverting input, and then it has an output. We have a logic gate right here, and you take a bunch of those things and you make them into groups, into arrays of logic gates, and then you connect it with a microprocessor. Connect to the microprocessor. Now, on the other side, we have proteins, genes. This is DNA. What's that? It's code. It's code. It's analogous to binary code, except it happens to be 4 base pairs. So instead of it being simple 1 or 0, which would be 2, it's got 4. Same idea, just uses a different type of code style.
It's also conductive. It also emits electromagnetic waves. It also emits
yes,
right.
That ties in
ultraviolet light, and I've seen stuff say it emits infrared, but a lot out there says it emits weak ultraviolet photons.
And that ties into where we're going in the later part of the show too. I'm glad you threw that in there. So, all right. So again, this is the physical layer. Now here we have, once we have the physical layer of the components, we now have actions that take place. in this case, it's just electrons. It's just electrical energy. Over here, in the biological world, it can be chemical energy, thermal energy, pH, light, electromagnetics. There's many other different types of things that can cause reactions to take place. Then, similarly to where we build up groups of purpose-designed gates, well, life has done this too, everybody, boys and girls. You know, life has built things into pathways, and it's built them into structures. And here we have now a group of gates now turned into a module. There's a circuit board. And here we have this thing that says DSP on it. That stands for digital signal processing. So here we have, there is a type of digital processing that's going on in the logic array of life right here. And that processing results in some sort of meaningful output coming out of that little tiny subsection in the cell, which is going to make something that the cell needs to either produce for adjacent cells or to keep itself alive. And then we go a little bit further. You got one computer, a network of computers. Okay, one cell, a network of cells. Now, in this case, these are isolated cells. These look to me like bacteria, and they tend to be able to operate as rogue autonomous units. But in human beings, or even in a mouse or a chimpanzee or a cricket, a lot of times, well, all the time, really, those cells are in little communities. You have a community of cells in you that are all associated with taking nitrogenous waste out of your blood, and they're called kidneys. So, you know, you've got a community of cells that all kind of have a dedicated subspecialization, and that's to take waste out of the liquid part of your blood. And so there we go. So there you go. That's kind of a nice, it's like a one-to-one. I'll zoom out here. Yeah, something like that. Anyway, yeah, so really cool stuff. So as I look at this, having been an electronics guy from a long time ago, and then having had a bunch of biology and chemistry training in college and afterwards, it is so analogous to the world of computers. It isn't even funny. You could take a qualified electrical engineer and plop him into a biochemistry lab, and he or she would hit the ground running, because the methods and the approach to building these systems is so similar. Next, where do you go with this? Okay, well, I thought this was kind of cute. Well, we have in here a processor. We have what looks like might be some kind of coils. We have a couple of sub-modules, and this is all extremely small. And if you look at the outside of this thing almost looks like a bacillus, a bacterium. Three major types of bacteria.
That's going to be sperm in 10 years due to infertility. That'll be sperm.
Yep, and sperm look a lot like this. They're motile, so they have these little fins, these little hairy things that propel them. So yeah, absolutely. And we're at the level that we can make things this small. I got something beeping. I'll try to shut it down. There you go. Inside of what would it be the casing of a bacterium, you can have something that's got propulsion, and it's got processing, and it's got sensing. It's going to have sensing, and it may have input output so that it can communicate to the outside, to artificial intelligence, or to a remote computer or whatever. And where are we going with this? Well, I think it was last week we were talking about the ability to, when you're making these things, you can make these by the million. Once you've got the design of what you're trying to build, making them by the millions at a time. And once that whole design process has been done, then scaling it up to that size is really not such a big deal. It ain't so hard. It doesn't take a lot of material. When you've built them, to run them, it doesn't even take a lot of energy to run these things. A lot of this type of newly designed nanocircuitry is capable of picking up enough energy from the ambient surroundings around it. Imagine.
Okay. I got to just interject here and indicate that this is an infographic, and the reality of what you're seeing here is not going to be silicon. what you're seeing here is something to visually bridge the gap between where we're at with microelectronic technology and how it translates into biotechnology. Yep. That's what this really is. And the reality of it is we're at a hybridization state where we have some components of what you see here that are silicon and the rest are biologic. And it is this hybridization that is the first, or the next, I should say, steps in our transhumanist transformation.
Yep. This would be a potential example of a hybrid. It would be quite viable to have some silicon in this thing, but it's immersed in a life environment.
Yeah. A hybrid structure would be something like a nano radio transmitter that is basically infused into the meshy substrate that makes up the structural integrity of an organ, right? Yep. That also has a fluorescent protein on it that indicates or provides bioluminescence for either an action to occur or as a notification that an action has occurred. And what that does in the body, I don't know. What I'm trying to illustrate for you is something simple that is a hybridization of genetic engineering that couples silicon, and I use that with air quotes.
Temporarily.
No, not even temporarily. It becomes a permanent, this is the fusion or the hybridization. You can look up nanotransistors that are more or less halfway inserted into a cell and halfway out. And they are PN junction type transistors that are designed to report on what's going on with cellular activity inside the cell, but do the reporting outside of the cell. And what it is it's this blending or hybridization of a literal piece of metal nanotech that's bent. And wherever it bends in this piece of nanotech, it changes material composition. And that's how they can make it a PN type transistor at the nanoscale. They can grow these things, and where the transistor bends, it also changes material composition. When they make it, when they grow the nanotech, the metal nanotech that's a composite, an alloy at the nanoscale, then they will dress it with biologically compatible materials. Things like polyethylene glycol, for example. There are many others. They will use other biologic substances. Bovine serum comes up frequently. It's biocompatible. So they use that as a delivery medium and or like a real generic base level. It's almost like a soup stock when you want to talk about trying to keep cells alive. So once you hybridize this stuff, when you hybridize the metal or the silicon being a palette of different structures, dielectric materials, conductive materials, and others, materials that transduce, they can transduce sound, light, electromagnetics, all of it. When you grow those and produce them and you hybridize biologic materials onto them, they then can interact and create something like you're seeing here that is a hybrid, where you have these inputs on the left, the chemicals, light, heat, nucleic acids, antigens are the things that I see here, metal ions as well, because you have sodium, calcium, potassium, et cetera, for neural function. All of those things are biologic functions that can then potentially be read and managed or stimulated with this hybridized technology that then creates the computer systems we're talking about at the nanoscale or the microscale inside of biologic structure.
Would you think that this could be a stepping stone, that the hybrid level where they're clearly at that, almost at the level of mastery of this hybrid level right now, is a stepping stone to a future time when they will be able to design something completely made out of biomolecules that does not require any silicon at all, and that we're in a transitional phase right now, some period of years?
It's happening right now. And so to bridge that gap, you think, well, that's impossible because everything is different in everybody's body. Think about software-defined architecture. And what that means is when whatever is done growing, right, when it's done or when it's matured and it has enough of a footprint to be understood, then it's measured. energy is phased at it, for example, and it's measured and it's mapped. And when it's mapped, then you can start assigning address points, and it becomes a unique signature that you can then begin to use to mark or interact with. And that is how you get a neural network and machine learning and artificial intelligence that works in the cloud to understand in real time where biological signals are at all times, because you essentially become a beacon with your unique growth pattern that becomes a biometric signature that ultimately is patentable because it was delivered universally with something that was made from a patent.
Yeah. So somebody like put brain power,
Wi-Fi chips.
Somebody put brain power into it, and it is a form of manifest intellectual property. Of course they can patent it. Yep.
I had a thought today with the magnetic proteins that are growing, those magnetic prions. Think about this. Think about the body being a DC circuit, and you have an anode and a cathode. If you can grow a plate, a metal plate, a theoretical metal plate that's responsive to magnetic fields that will then translate to electricity or some other transducer based on whatever it is that's around that tissue, you then have an anode and a cathode capability with something like the brain or a different organ. If you can get an organ to resonate, or you can get energy to stimulate neural function in the body, and you have another common understood positive or negative source, anode or cathode, meaning the magnetic patch or whatever that's on your body that is also conductive, you then can have very easy access to transmit energy through the body.
Interface device.
And I'll show you a little bit of that if we have time today. If we don't, it'll definitely be next week.
By the way, what you're seeing here is extremely clunky, as TMC pointed out. It is already vastly more elegant and streamlined than anything.
This drawing's beautiful.
It's good.
What this drawing is doing is bridging the visual and engineering conceptual gap between modern technology as we understand it and biotechnology that is here that most people don't really get yet. Like it doesn't compute. And if you want, I can kind of take over and we can walk this path a little bit for a little while.
Well, I'll go to my last slide.
Right.
I've only got one more panel left, and it's kind of comical. So leading off from the ability, once you've got the design and you can build machinery that makes these microparticles, that being able to spit out millions of them at a time, it doesn't take a lot of material. It's not going to take, and they're very small. You can literally make these things by the liter at a time. So we arrive at the point where we have credit to David Parkin's cartoon. I think I got the link to this out there as well. We have the Cellomatic. Notice, Cellomatic. So we're just cranking out purpose-designed cells that have got specific code in them for a reason, with a design, a target, a location, and a function. And there you go. And as for whether these things have been designed to communicate with the outside, or whether they've been designed to be semi-autonomous, they may even have a little bit of onboard AI inside that allows them to interpret their environment and operate autonomously. Who knows? But it's amazing. You know why? Because science fiction comes true.
Here we go. Those of you that are still here on this journey.
All righty.
We're going to look at, I believe it's this tab right here. Yeah. All right. So we're going to start over here. And magnetism plays key role in DARPA's research to develop a brain-machine interface without surgery. All right. So there's more to it than meets the eye. So we're going to go through this a piece at a time, and it's important because it's going to build. Here we go. So DARPA's looking at ways to access the brain through this non-surgical neurotechnology program. It's known as the N3 program. You can look it up. There's lots of articles about it. It's a huge deal. They initial funding, 6 organizations. Battelle is one of them. You have Carnegie Mellon, Johns Hopkins, Applied Physics Laboratory, Palo Alto Research, Rice University, which we'll look at in a minute, Teledyne Scientific, and some others, right? So the two of interest are the Brainstorm project with Patel and Rice's Moana project, which they're going to talk about in here. This is a great article. And what these two different things do is deliver electromagnetic nanotransducers, magnetoelectric nanotransducers. This is Patel's Brainstorm project. And these can be doped with genetic information that would be from the recipes derived from Rice University. And I'll show you that article in a minute. There are other schools that are working on these technologies. So technologies like optogenetics, chemogenetics, thermogenetics, sonogenetics, and on and on and on and on. Magnetogenetics, how could I leave that one out, right? There are lots of schools and private industry and whatever working on this stuff. And what I'm trying to convey to you is that magnetoelectric nanoparticles, nanotransducers, provide a way to deliver site selectively genetic information to modify tissue and also perform communication functions. That is the beauty of this Brainstorm electromagnetic transducer. And here in a raw form is what they look like. This is before you start blending technologies. And what I mean by blending technologies, you say, hey, I have this really cool composite. It does this. And then you go to a school like MIT or Harvard and they go, hey, we can break that down to the atomic level. And we have this toolkit that allows us to grow this stuff in a pan with this particular chemical under these particular conditions. And what you get are these perfectly round sized balls, or what you get are these perfectly cylindrical components. And you have your material that does everything that it's supposed to do, but it's in this beautiful form factor. And the beauty of that is now we can control exactly where it goes in the body and what orientation and field characteristics are necessary based on how we can grow these things to stimulate the brain. So we can put different kinds all in the same injection, right? After it's been refined, we can put it in your vein or in your tissue, and we can deliver it. And we can run it with magnetic fields because remember, it's been made very, very sophisticatedly with the help of schools like Harvard, MIT, and others. And it moves around and deposits into the brain, and it can encode and decode information, as well as deliver genetic information, which we'll get to in a minute. And one of the additional components is to be able to remove the magnetoelectric nanotransducers when they're no longer required. So the magnetic field can move these things around. Magnetic field can take them out of the body, meaning process them through kidneys or excrete them through the skin or whatever. And
take them out, steer them.
Yeah.
Put them in the place where whatever they were designed for will be chemically or electrically active for the purpose they were made.
Yeah. So here's a coil. Coil is going to be a common thing if you're not familiar with electromagnetic coils. I encourage you to get familiar. Every device you have has one or two or four. So learn about coils. They're amazing instruments. So nanotransducers would use magnetoelectric nanoparticles to establish a bidirectional communication channel with the brain. Neurons in the brain operate through electrical signals. The magnetic core of the nanotransducers would convert neuroelectric signals into magnetic ones that will be sent through the skull to a helmet-based transceiver worn by the user. I want to emphasize to you that what they're looking at doing is taking the electrical signals and converting them into magnetic signals that can then be read by something outside the brain. And the reason I say that to you is because there is technologies that do things like use laser beams to understand magnetic fields. And when this stuff reaches a form factor like in an iPhone, all of a sudden now you have laser array systems that potentially are able to read the magnetic fields from the nanotransducers that are available in a military grade application in an experimental phase, publicly speaking at this point, fine print, et cetera, et cetera. method and apparatus for optically detecting magnetic resonance. And this is from MIT, and you can go down the rabbit trail from here. There are a couple other ones that illustrate where companies like Lockheed Martin are at with this technology. And when they can integrate nano diamonds with nitrogen vacancies in them, which are just it's a real fancy way of saying an inclusion. So those of you that know what the four eyes are in diamonds, right? The inclusion is one of them, and that's the imperfections in them. Well, the ones that have nitrogen vacancy in them are really, really useful, because what they can do is they can shine light through it, and then they can read and measure the photon spins, and then they can introduce a magnetic field, a very, 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 very low magnetic field, and the photon spins will change as the light passes through the nitrogen vacancy inside of a diamond. And when you can put something like that in a V-cell array in something like an iPhone, now you have the ability to do things like image really, really deep inside the brain and do it with holography.
Or something even other than an iPhone, something as like a neck cooling bracelet. You know, you've seen those neck coolers, or, you know, a variety of things.
The example that I was providing, and I'm sure there are others, right? Because anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit trail. The example I was providing was essentially using light to be able to measure magnetic field, and it has to be coherent light, and there's a lot of subsets to that, but all of that is software and sophistication with software at this point, because when you start looking at how laser systems are built and put into something like an iPhone, it's anything you see that can be done like for a light show in China or at the Bellagio, whatever, right? That can be done with your iPhone, if not better.
Two major areas here. All that you got to do is the hardware and the software. All you really got to do with the hardware is make sure that it has the input output that you want it to have, that it's small enough, and that you can get it where you need it, and have it not be engulfed by white blood cells and rejected out of the organism. And then all the rest of it is all code. It's all code.
There's
control code.
There's many different flavors to accessing the body. There's many different flavors, and we're at the point where I think many of them have been matured, and we're at the point where a lot of them are kind of fusing together, and the best of them are going to sort of make their way to the top. And when 2 or 3 years go by, I think they're going to have a pretty good idea of what's going to work and what's not going to work, and then off we go with whoever's left over. And what I mean by that is something like this. You've got Rice University that's making Moana, which is a magnetic, optical, and acoustic neural access device. And so what this helmet system is going to do is provide a universal platform to the military to put on the heads of many, 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 many different people, and then understand how magnetic fields, optical systems, and acoustic systems work with the brain. How do you read and write information into and out of the brain and do it in a fashion that's secure and encrypted? And then the next logical step, obviously, is how do you do this without having a helmet on the head, where you can do this at distance? And the way that is going to be learned is by having helmets on the heads of many, 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 many people, and understanding how the waves, whether they be magnetic fields or light or acoustics, as they interfere inside the brain, you're going to be able to capture all of that data on thousands of people all day long. And so when you get all that data put together, you're going to be able to put algorithms out there that are going to be able to have the same level of precision and sophistication from your 5G antenna system that's outside your window, or the one maybe a mile away, or maybe the satellite array system in space. I don't know how sophisticated it is. It's DARPA and the United States government, for crying out loud, and China and Russia and India and Europe and everybody else, because this technology is everywhere, man. It's everywhere. This is the race. This is the race at this point, and we're all part of the race now. The human race is part of the great race to the Great Reset. So the Moana project, right, is looking at building systems that provide a universal platform for the military to test brain-computer interfaces. And this is where it gets kind of weird. So here's the Moana helmet, and here's a breakdown roughly of what they got conceptually speaking. It's a helmet that fits, form factor like a Kevlar helmet or a flight helmet. It's got magnetic coils in it. It's got piezoelectric transducers in it to deliver ultrasound. It's got very sophisticated light arrays, which at this point are standard, coming out at billions and billions and billions of units.
And consumer devices.
From China. So here's where it gets kind of creepy, man.
Look at that.
It says here that, right, they want 50 millisecond latency thresholds at a minimum, right, for spatial resolution. They want a minimum of 16 locations in the brain about the size of the P. These are minimum requirements for this DARPA program. Here it is. Robinson said Moana's decoding and encoding technologies will employ viral vector gene technology, a technology that's in clinical trials for treating macular degeneration, as well as some cancers and neurological conditions. Genetic payloads, which differ for decoding and encoding, what they're talking about is being able to read or write to the brain using different genetic pieces, different genetic code to code different pieces of the brain or the nervous system or organs, one for read, one for write, one for read, one for write. They'll be delivered with the help, in this case, of ultrasound. And when you understand how electromagnetic systems are able to generate ultrasound through organ resonance, bone resonance, or good old-fashioned thermoacoustics, which is how the voice-to-skull technology works that you can look up courtesy of publicly available patents by the Air Force ×2. There's 2 of them out there that talk about the acoustic effect, where they can send microwaves to the head and the tissue rapidly heats up and it rapidly cools, and that creates a sound wave, and that stimulates the nerves, which, modulated correctly, allows for speech to be transferred into the brain. You can look this up. I can show you if you want. The bottom line is... It's
interpreted by the brain as speech. Yep.
The bottom line is that is ultrasound with the use of microwaves or millimeter waves at this point, or ultra wideband, because that's everywhere now. That's a fancy term that all of these cell phone companies and telecom providers are throwing out there, right? Look it up, ultra wideband. And what it is it's chirp radar and it's micro impulse radar. And ultra wideband, marketed by a telecom company, is going to offer you really, really, really fast speeds. And ultra wideband, marketed by a cell phone company, is going to offer you proximity sensing and hands-free access to stuff. And your thermostat knowing when you get home, and your fridge knowing when you want something or whatever, right? Starting your car, opening up your secure ID access to your place of work with your phone. That's what these technologies are going to be marketed to you as. And what they do, what they can do is do things like generate ultrasound in your body. And while we're on the case of ultra wideband, look up what medical imaging can do, what you can do, with medical imaging using ultra wideband.
Have you got anything in...
You can use ultra wideband to image the body with better resolution than you get just using ultrasound. And you can do it, you can send and you can pick up the resolution with the same antennas. And Lawrence Livermore Laboratory really pioneered that back in the 90s, and you can look up those patents. But back to this idea of using ultrasound to allow genetic payloads, differing genetic payloads, to go different places in the brain, right? The ultrasound allows it to be deposited at specific sites without having the lock and key mechanisms with the biomolecules. So they can put an ultrasound array on the head, deliver the injection, allow the injection to infuse to the brain, open up the brain just at a particular location in the brain, because they can focus the ultrasound waves to converge at one little place. And when the right resonant characteristics occur at that one little place, it opens up the blood-brain barrier, and the medicine can go in, and you can genetically modify very, very specific centers in the brain after delivering something like an injection, especially if you have something that looks like this. Magnetoelectric nanotransducers to deliver things like genetic payloads, in addition to being stimulators to read and write to the brain. So here's where it gets really, really cool. Harvard partnership to facilitate brain-targeted drug delivery, right? Pre-competitive multi-partner industry collaboration. And this is where it gets kind of really creepy. We're not going to read this article. What I want to do is share this video with you, but I have to drop share because I did not check the share sound box. So bear with me for one moment.
And we could paraphrase through the article if we want to, but let's go to the video and yeah, okay.
Here's this.
Love the title, don't you?
Yeah.
Hey guys, it's the brain targeting program. Okay. Why am I so happy?
The blood-brain barrier separates brain tissue from the body's blood circulation. It allows selective passage of iron, glucose, and other small molecules, shown here as green dots, from the blood to the brain that are needed for normal brain function, and it shields the brain from dangerous bacteria, viruses, and inflammatory proteins. However, the blood-brain barrier's protective function also blocks potentially helpful drugs from entering the brain. For most drugs taken orally or by injection, less than 1% of each dose crosses the blood-brain barrier to enter the brain. For large molecules such as therapeutic antibodies, the amount crossing into the brain is often even lower than small molecule drugs, 0.1% or less. This limited transport of drugs into the brain reduces the efficacy of many brain-targeted therapies. New, more effective drug delivery methods are urgently needed to help treat diseases of the central nervous system. Scientists working on the Wyss Institute's brain targeting program are helping to address this critical unmet need by developing new targeting strategies to help drugs more effectively reach the brain. To do this, they are exploiting the transcytosis process, in which normally essential molecules such as insulin and iron, shown here in purple, are effectively shuttled across the blood-brain barrier. Specific transcytosis receptor proteins, shown in cyan, bind to their ligands on the blood-exposed surface of endothelial cells, transport them across the endothelial layer, and release them at the brain-exposed surface into the brain. Transcytosis receptors are expressed in blood vessels of all parts of the body. To identify those that are enriched in the blood-brain barrier and could be useful for drug delivery into the brain, Wyss researchers are building a database from the results of deep protein and RNA expression analysis. To search the database for transport target candidates that are expressed at high levels in the brain endothelial cells and lower levels in the endothelial cells of other organs, such as the proteins shown here in cyan, they are developing new bioinformatic algorithms. After discovering new candidate receptors, the team will develop antibodies that bind to them. Then, the specific antibody domain that directly contacts the transcytosis receptors will be isolated and fused to existing antibody drugs targeting brain diseases. These newly engineered antibodies will bind their target transcytosis receptor proteins and be transcytosed to the brain side of the blood-brain barrier. The engineered antibodies that bind to new transcytosis receptor proteins will be further investigated using both transgenic mice expressing human versions of the transcytosis receptors and exploratory models of the human blood-brain barrier that recapitulate drug transport in vivo, much like it occurs in the brain vasculature. Candidate antibody shuttles are tested in vivo in transgenic mice that express the human counterparts of the target transcytosis receptors. This approach helps determine how much of a shuttled antibody accumulates in the brain after it has been injected. In parallel, the Wyss team is developing human models of the blood-brain barrier in which they can confirm how well the engineered antibody drugs cross the blood-brain barrier to select the ones that are most efficiently transcytosed. Antibodies that successfully cross the blood-brain barrier will become lead candidates as shuttle antibodies to treat brain diseases. The development of high-quality shuttle antibodies that efficiently cross the human blood-brain barrier could help enable new therapies for a broad range of brain-specific disorders and diseases.
Yeah, so look at that as a platform. That's a platform technology where you get a couple infusions and new things start growing and all of a sudden they like each other. And now you got one that can go through the brain and the other one is the special little protein that does this, that, and the other. So I'm just saying.
Did you see us going back and forth in the chat there? Yeah, we're all onto it. Yeah.
Holy crap, dude. So this is high level where I think this is going, and then we'll get into capacitive coupling. And what I want to show you here, very at a high level, is quantum communication that employs something like the Rydberg principle, and there are many others. I learned about this just recently, and it's not the be all end all holy grail. I'm just sharing with you what I've learned thus far.
Hang on 1 second. If there is the quantum factor, and that all sounds kind of, woo-wee and woo-woo to us, but I'll tell you, it is absolutely a manifestation in our real physical world, quantum effects, and that would really fry our brains. We won't be able to get to that, but if you just graze over it,
we're not digging that, dude. More. I just want to. So if you want to look this up, just go to Human Internet 1 on Twitter, and you can find this. And what this talks about is being able to understand. Dude, I've got to just let me explain the Rydberg concept. This is huge. It's a big deal because they can do this with readily available stuff. It's a mathematical formula used to predict the wavelength of light resulting from an electron moving between energy levels of an atom, right? So when an electron changes from one atomic orbit to another, an electron's energy changes. The electron changes from an orbital with a higher energy to a lower energy state, right? And this causes a photon to be emitted. And what this is talking about really is similar to upconverting nanoparticles, but that's another topic. It's a quantum effect, and it's a quantum thing, and they can measure this stuff. And the Rydberg equation allows, right? What this is basically saying is it can understand vibration, and it changes light waves. So, like I said, I just learned this. I want to read this to you real fast. You put me in a rush, Andy, and threw me, bro. Bam, bam. Fucking sucks, dude. So, traveling without moving. Quantum communication scheme transfers quantum states without transmitting physical particles. It's a very, very, very big deal. It says here, while Einstein considered quantum entanglement spooky action at a distance, and those who fully accept entanglement acknowledge to be counterintuitive, right? It says here that, dude, never mind.
So just to have everybody really, really know, it was originally called spooky action at a distance. Like there's no explanation in classical physics for how this happens, but we have proven quantum entanglement over and over and over again now. It's real, and it opens a whole panorama of possibilities, and it involves time and space and wicked fast interaction from one particle to another. And that's enough of a summary for now. We'll get into it one of these shows.
We need to do something on this, but anyway, it talks about.
Let's see, let me enlarge it so I can see.
We're going to drag here. So it doesn't matter, dude. Let's move forward.
All right.
Outside of the Rydberg principle, the reason it applies really is because you start looking at how DNA and cells resonate, and then you start understanding how mechanical resonance impacts genetics and proteins, and you can start measuring. You can start measuring how these mechanical vibrations are interacting with the body, looking at how the wavelengths of light change. And if you understand how infrared passes through the body, for example, and how prevalent infrared is, and or other principles that are similar to the Rydberg principle. And what I mean by that is this: what's stopping this principle from applying to some other form or some other scale in the electromagnetic spectrum?
Nothing.
Can you understand this principle?
Right.
Can you understand this principle looking at a system using microwaves or millimeter waves? And if you can, what this implies is you are able to deliver quantum systems that understand non-locality, which means you don't have to have a quantum system inside a fiber optic, and it doesn't have to be a streamlined, focused, laser, invisible beam for quantum communications. Quantum communications can occur with something like your cell phone with existing technologies. That's really what this implies if you can go that far in the journey, the rabbit hole. So if that's true, what this really means is when you start interacting with DNA, which is where the cell resonance is going, and you can look at DNA without time, what does that imply?
It's not if it's true. It is true. It's just a matter of getting the science far enough ahead to be able to exploit that.
What I'm getting at is
if you can start
talking to DNA are you able to access DNA and code it? Are you able to access DNA and read it? And if you can read DNA using these systems with non-locality, then you can legitimately house people in a confined space and address them, and over a period of time do things like try to freaking understand their genetics. And when you start looking at what billionaires or trillionaires or people that have nothing else to do because they got nothing else to do but figure out stuff, right? Infinite amounts of resources. Why wouldn't they try to understand and unlock the secrets of DNA? And if you could, here's where it gets weird. If you don't have time in the equation, you start measuring DNA, can you see into the future? Can you see into the past? Looking at DNA based on the understanding that what happens in your life gets encoded into your DNA. So when you have a kid, what happens in your life is encoded in your DNA that's passed to your children. And when you think about the number of times the human species has procreated to bring us all together today, that's pretty freaking interesting. If you had nothing else to do but go, I have unlimited resources, and let's unravel the human species. Let's take the next 100 years and unravel the human species. Anyway, non-local, free space, quantum emitters that are able to do things like potentially understand DNA. Anyway, so let's go back to more boring stuff, which is really not boring stuff. It's kind of interesting.
Not to me. If anybody's bored, just let us know. I'm watching. I'm with you.
It's all in here. So if you go to humaninternet.org, you can, or not humaninternet.org, excuse me, Human Internet 1 on Twitter, you can find this whole thing. And there's documents here on quantum physics meets biology, biophysiology, a framework for understanding bioenergetics and how that ties in. And this is where it gets really weird. So if you have all this free space stuff, this wireless measurement technology that's being deployed with these complex phased array systems, be it through a laser system on your phone or a phased array system on your phone, home router, cell network, satellite network, whatever, you're putting these complex directed energy systems out there. How do you measure the body? How do you understand what's going on in real time? How do you know where people are? And you start getting into things like no contact system for sensing and signaling using capacitive fields. And what this looks like is this. Things like your home wiring in your house or the wiring in your office, right? Wherever you are.
Yep.
Those emit electromagnetic fields. And what they do is they can couple the body with these electromagnetic fields, and then they can measure what's going on with the body. They can transmit power through the body. They can transmit data through the body. Naturally, these things aren't going to load right now. So while it's going through its little pause phase, I'm gonna load some more of these, and then while they're booting, man, I'll go to these other patents that I already preloaded because I kind of anticipated this happening. So here's the one we looked at a little while ago, right? This idea of being able to use light to understand magnetic fields, which is trippy because antennas emit electromagnetic fields. So if you can use the light systems in a phone to measure the electromagnetic fields and do things like quantum sense, you now have quantum sensors out there that are going to function on timescales that are less than a millisecond latency with 5G. And that opens up a lot of interesting opportunities when you start looking at what's possible with quantum.
Good speed already. Even without quantum, the speed is really, really excellent with the new stuff.
Yeah.
Once you add that in, you've really taken it to the next level.
Well, the quantum just allows data processing fusion to constantly stay ahead of network speed. So the real issue at this point is network latency. The computing power, if you will, with supercomputers and quantum computers has far surpassed what is possible with transmitting over the internet in a multi-node domain. So the idea is to reduce latency in the network as much as possible. The quantum space really just opens up opportunities for probabilistic computation to run concurrently or congruently with classical supercomputer computation to fuse older systems with newer systems to translate what is hypothetically computationally figured out and ultimately decided upon, and then having that manifest in the real world through whatever automated mechanisms exist. And soon it's going to be people. So Here's a patent for method and an apparatus for transmitting power and data using the human body. This is from Microsoft, and this was a spinoff from an MIT patent. We're not going to get into the nuances of this. Just know that they can send high frequencies through your body and modulate it, and they can segment it with orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, and they can use quadrature amplitude modulation techniques through your body, transmitting power and information. Here's another one. This is one from MIT. Method and apparatus for trans-body transmission of power and information. And when you start looking at how this is done, they're done with capacitive fields. And when you start understanding how electromagnetic fields can exist and always be there, but be at low levels, as long as you have a potential difference where you have an anode and a cathode, like talked about earlier, you're able to put the body into the invisible atmospheric conductive atmosphere that's there, and you don't even know you're connected to it because it's not shocking you. It doesn't directly interface with you in the sense that you would notice it, but it's there. And as a result of that, they've developed really cool technologies like being able to shake somebody's hand, and through the handshake, your phone passes your business card information to that person's phone because you've made electro-dermal contact with their skin, and your capacitive field on your phone talks to the capacitive field or the other phone. They set up a pairing, if you will, and the authorization occurs through the electrical connection that's made when you shake somebody's hand. That's just one example of how this stuff works. It's just one example. So covert applications for this stuff, I'm sure, have been matured a long time ago.
That's
and
just
now,
one example. That's just one example.
Dude, it gets insane. It gets insane what they can do with this stuff. Anyway, here's another example of, if it'll load, no contact system for sensing and signaling by externally induced intra-body.
Okay, so check that out. What that means is they will abide by FCC safe radiation limits.
Exactly.
But go ahead.
They actually mention that in here. This one or the last one, but what they talk about is that they're using communication technologies that don't fall within FCC regulation at all. And then the fields that are generated that are secondary in nature fall below what the FCC requirements are, and therefore it's an unregulated technology. So it becomes, for lack of a better term, open source. More or less. It's still patented, but it's not necessarily regulated because it doesn't meet any of the health and safety concerns. And it talks about having quasi electrostatic fields, right, being generated while you're capacitively coupled to the environment around you. And so something like a cell phone has a proximity sensor in it, and I can show you a Google patent that actually talks about connecting your nervous system to the cell phone. There's a Google patent out there that talks about this. And it's a proximity sensor patent. But anyway, so it has its own sensors, and then it has your body. And so it assigns sensors that are close to your body, and it measures that. And then it assigns sensors that are farther away from your body, and it measures that. And it understands the difference between the two, and there's a voltage potential difference. And what it does is it hooks up capacitive field between you and the environment and the plates on your phone, for example, or something else in the environment that also is intelligently connected to your phone to form a capacitor plate at distance. So your phone could be one capacitor plate, and something else that's connected digitally to your phone that's also conductive can function as a capacitor in the room, can be the other side of that anode cathode thing, where your body is also included in the environmental quasi-static electric field that isn't necessarily regulated by the FCC, but hey, they can send signals through your body and potentially throw power to devices through your body using these fields. And when you understand, I'll say this about that. I have looked at quasi-static electric field patents a little bit more, and quasi-electrostatic fields do some very interesting things to the body medically. They have medical patents for quasi-static electric fields that do some very, very interesting things. We'll just leave it at that. And like genetic folding, manipulation, stunting, growing, enhancing, all that. They can do all that. And the reason why is because the quasi-static electric field ultimately generates a subsequent magnetic field. Interesting that the, magnetic prions that are kind of popping out everywhere, like, like a bad rash kind of a thing, right? So these quasi-static electric fields will interact, generate magnetic fields, which then transduce back into electrical signals into the nervous system. And so this is how you get something like a proximity sensor in a cell phone to be able to neurally modulate your brain using magnetic prions or the magnetoelectric nanoparticles that function as a handoff, that function as a nano-sized transducer to take a quasi-static electric field, right? Quasi-electrostatic field, turn it into a magnetic field, and then have that immediately generate, because they're linear in nature, a magnetic field and an electric field, it generates an electric field or electric voltage in your cells next to the magnetic stuff in your body. So if you can make that jump with your cell phone or a smartwatch, things that are right next to your body, now you can start seeing 5G phased array antenna systems able to take multiple directed beams of energy and intersect them, converge them at the or near the, in the vicinity of a person and generate a fringe electric field, which potentially would create something like a quasi-static electric field when you start interacting with the body or other conductive things in the room. So let's say you have a room in your house and you have something conductive. You have a stainless steel sink or you have a stainless steel fridge and you've got some antennas on your phone and some, like a reflective mirror that's got metal in it, whatever. The 5G system, if you will, the smart AI system will understand how electromagnetic waves bounce off objects and it'll map it. How much absorbs? How does it reflect? How does it change the polarization? How much energy is lost? How much energy is gained? Can I get this thing to resonate? Can I get it to amplify the energy that I'm sending at it? Once it has the entire atmosphere and environment mapped, when you're in it, 5G systems could potentially beam energy at these resonators or reflector elements and build complex electromagnetic environments that generate something like a quasi-electrostatic field remotely and also be able to measure it. And that's well beyond the what I just said. That's a whole nother, that's like a 2 or 3 hour discussion to understand directed energy systems and how they can bounce off things and resonate and actually become repeater resonators that build new near field. Like you can beam electromagnetic energy at a metal sign at a bus stop, and dudes sitting at the bus stop with the metal sign right next to him could literally be inside of a near field.
Yes.
A near electric field or a near magnetic field from the resonator that is now the bus stop sign from the directed energy system that's sending electromagnetic waves at the metal sign, causing it to resonate, ultimately making it an antenna. They're making a metal sign its own antenna, building a near field around it. And if it's a low frequency, like if you're dealing with kilohertz, so you can take like a 1 megahertz and a 1.1 megahertz signal, and you can cross them over and you get 0.1 megahertz left over. So you get 100 kilohertz. If you did something like that with high frequency 5G systems and put a low re-resonated signal out at something like a bus stop sign, you could really put a lot of energy in 3 or 4 people sitting at the bench right next to the bus stop sign with near field electromagnetics. And none of that's discussed at all.
And there's more. The bus stop sign could be at an angle, and you could actually be around the corner of a big impenetrable cement building, bounce off the bus stop sign at an angle, and you don't even see them, but the system sees them, and they're seeing the readback from them.
And that is the sophistication of an AI system. When you think about how an AI system that's running software-defined networks, software-defined antennas, it has to understand, or it will understand, everything about the environment to the best of its ability with whatever sensor platforms are made available to it. What that means is that it will send out its own energy, but it will also use whatever other systems are nearby it has access to have that or those components measure the energy it's transmitting, but also measure the energy from what those other components are transmitting and understand the environment. So how do those energies bounce off walls? How do those energies absorb into trees, where are people? And it has to understand all of these things on purpose. It's built into the safety mechanisms, which is why it's a fail-safe mechanism so that once it's built, you can't remove it anymore for something like a connected car or remotely powered drones. Here's where it's going to go, Indy. Here's where it's going to go. Remotely powered drones are going to be battery operated. Batteries are going to start to fail. They're going to say that's a problem. Facebook already has patents for stuff on this, and I'm sure Amazon does too. Directed energy systems from 5G will send directed energy to a drone while it's flying to make sure it has a constant supply of power to ensure that it doesn't fall out of the sky and kill grandma. And so it's going to have to know when the drone is nearby a baby stroller or a puppy as it's dropping off the drone package, so it doesn't necessarily put harmful electromagnetic radiation in the sphere of a biological. And that's how it's going to be. That's how it's going to be sold to government. And what it's going to do, it's going to open up the door for artificial intelligence and large institutions to regulate when and how directed energy systems are used for commerce, which ultimately impacts how the people are affected. Because commerce is everywhere people are. Otherwise, commerce wouldn't exist.
I never thought of that. Using some of the new systems, the 5G systems, the big towers, to keep the drones powered with wireless energy, wireless electricity.
Yeah. Imagine what they can do with you. Let's move on.
Another statement that you made was a device that is, going about the process of interacting with you or profiling you will use the other devices that are in its communication range. Well, guess what? More and more of all of these devices are networking themselves invisibly to you. You don't even know that they're connecting to each other. Yeah. So it will immediately poll the whole surrounding area of whatever other devices are compatible, and most of them are. All right. So it'll use whatever there is out there to optimize the signal and the interaction that it's trying to do.
So here's just another technology from MIT, buffered body return receiver. And these are different technologies that allow other institutions or industries to start experimenting. So that's what groups like Harvard and MIT do. They build platforms that allow others to innovate. So they innovative platforms. They innovate platforms for others to innovate with. So they innovate for innovators. And so it's really what I see from something like this. And what it does is start being able to segment a signal. So you can send a signal and basically split it and do what you need to do with it and send it two different directions. If it's power versus communication, or two different communications for a complex body area network. And they can, what they call buffer. So anyway. Yeah, it gets crazier. System and method for applying or receiving signals to or from biologic tissues. And this rabbit trail went a long way, but this ties back into the conductive stuff that's on all the headphones. I found a whole bunch of other stuff today that shows conductive silicone and conductive traces and conductive nanotech that's infused into different materials to make it conductive, and vapor depositing techniques to allow sleek, sexy form factor stuff to be conductive, to do things like make contact with your skin or to generate capacitive fields, so that when your body comes near these devices or you're wearing these devices, these capacitive fields can start interfacing and running data through your body, or sending power into your body, or directly accessing your nervous system, which is where these patents took me today through the second half of my day. So let's see if these guys loaded. Let's see. Electronic system for activation, inhibition, modification, and development of functioning cells, organisms, and living beings. Those of you that go down the TI path and the MK Ultra stuff, right? Jose Delgado, I'm sure you know that name. There's a patent from this guy, 1982. And then 1985, and it's been abandoned. And what it talks about is using non-invasive electromagnetic fields, using unidirectional square waves with specific characteristics that are fairly easy to generate with modern electronics. And they're applied through antennas. So we mean like Bluetooth, okay, which produce magnetic fields. That's right, electromagnetic radiation, 2.4 gigahertz, got it. Okay, the magnetic fields are applied to living beings with the purpose of producing predictable modifications. Okay, determining structures, functions, and manifestations. So I'm just gonna show you a picture of this from the 80s, where you have antennas that are really, really close to where, headphones would be today. And when you understand phased array and pulse modulation and the sophistication with frequency application with wave interference based on what technologies were like back in the 80s, you can see how something like this might turn into something like an AirPod. I'm just saying.
honestly, the physics, the wave physics and the electronics of this is not much different from what it was 40 years ago. It's just the development and advance of the applicability, the material science, and the crazy mad scientists that dream up all of these other ways of using it.
Here's where this is going with the quantum stuff, folks.
For entertainment purposes only.
Yeah, this is quantum medicine, and this is another application of quantum. And, you know, those that don't believe in quantum, I get it. And I to some extent, I understand your philosophical purity, and I respect it and totally appreciate it. But in order for people, I think at this point, to be able to have a good understanding of what it is that I think is trying to quantify, which is just field theory, and take it down whatever trail you want, understanding field theory, because everything is fields. It's nothing more than that. And so however you want to describe that. But quantum is like this universal next step across the general field of science. And it could have potentially been intentionally laden with landmines, and you could go down that rabbit trail of quantum is bullshit. I get it. But it's enough of a start to get a lot of people looking at the direction of, hey, dude, things are vibrating. Hey, dude, things are energy. Hey, dude, we can do things like not necessarily be restricted by time. And that all applies with everybody else's, I don't want to say everybody else's, others in the field of magnetics and electromagnetics out there in the alternative that talk about these things that are brilliant. They're brilliant. And most of them aren't formally educated, which says what about our education system? Back to the whole quantum being a facade, forget all that. Look at what this stuff can do. Pulsed electric fields, low frequency, low energy fields, right, can do things like move ions and protons around. They can control how they function, how they spin, how they move, how they interact with other pieces of matter. And this is huge when you start looking at how something like a mobile device, right, how that's built and what the little components are inside and how the software and the circuits are built and how they can kind of maybe do similar stuff like this when it's sitting in your pocket, like generate low frequency pulsed electric fields to start oscillating and modulating ions and do things like use the skin that's adjacent to your butt or your boob or your waist or the side, right, where you've got your phone on your hip, and just gently modulate the neurons there using the ions and or the protons and start talking to your nervous system, forming that connection, building the connection, getting the nervous system subliminally accustomed to talking to something like your phone, where it becomes subliminal and almost wanted and needed. And this is how sophisticated this stuff is, folks. And it's done by doing things like transporting ions and potentially protons through membranes to regulate electropotentials across the membranes in your cells, and do things like control your mood and chemical excretions. And they can even potentially control how well you grow, like your bones and your muscles and your brain and all that. And there's electromagnetic medicine out there for everything, like everything. Here's MIT, no contact system for sensing, signaling. We already looked at this one. So anyway, capacitive fields are a huge deal. Your phone, your watch, they all ground to your body. And what that means is it uses capacitive fields to ground your body to the device. They do that on purpose because it helps the device ultimately remove parasitic resonance, because your body's an antenna. And if you're connected to the phone, you essentially ground to the phone. You no longer are a parasitic resonance to that phone. So there's a mechanical reason why they want to digitally or electrically connect to your body, because you are a conductor. You are an antenna. Your body is an amazing, beautiful piece of machinery that now has a connection to it, courtesy of Google and Apple and whoever else is in this interdimensional entity game. And I'll just leave it at that.
It's almost like becoming part of the device.
Yeah.
Or the system. Yeah. Wild stuff.
So where do we go from here?
Oh, man.
We got 20 minutes. I mean, there's more. We can go down the quantum rabbit hole for a minute and just look at what I know what we can do, Andy. I'm gonna take Sherry back. Do you have something else, or can I have it back?
Grab it. All right. Let's see here. Yeah.
I want to show you.
We've gone so much into the specificity of this. I think we should keep going, because if I were to show anything else I have, it would be backing us out to the 40,000 foot view. Mm-hmm. Keep going.
Okay. I'm going to try to recenter where was I? I don't know where my window went. I think this is it right here, actually. Yeah, this is it right here. So I'm looking for this quantum piece right here. Here it is, the awareness of the facile system. And the reason I want to share.
If you need a minute to get it sorted out, I have a quick little article I can go into for digression if you want. But whatever.
I got it right here.
Okay, good.
Yeah, hopefully it loads, like I said. So the facile system and what this talks about, you should look this up, because mechanical vibrations have a whole lot to do with how your cells function. They can actually become diseased or improved based on mechanical vibrations, and they become weak or stronger based on mechanical vibrations. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And when you start looking at this stuff, I'm trying to see if there's a picture in here. There's not. That's unfortunate. So it says here, it says the fascial system supports, protects, and evolves and connects the human body. It can be divided into solid and liquid fascia, closely interlinked without interruption between the different components, making the subdivision of the fascia layers unnecessary, or making them into basically indistinguishable. They're unnecessary. What they're getting at here is that, I'll just read it. Healthcare professionals such as medical doctors and physiotherapists have different clinical tools for patient assessments, including palpation. The touch meets the skin as the first facile tissue, but the resulting cell deformation can get deeper, and it can reach the DNA of different cell tissues. The morphological deformation of cellular components starts numerous mechanometabolic and electromagnetic messages. This is so important when you start looking at ultrasound and how it dinks around in the body and how thermal dinks around in the body and all that other stuff. This information will affect the entire body structure as the palpated area and the remaining non-palpated tissues. The mechanisms that allow cells to communicate with each other are based on the principles of physiology and quantum physics. The article reviewed these scientific concepts to understand the importance of palpation, which is just oscillation, vibration, pressure, right? In the clinical setting, and the complexity of cellular behavior. So how does this stuff interact and influence cellular behavior? Right? It's not yet completely understood, and this is why they're studying this stuff and trying to fuse these ideas of resonance and vibration and pressure and mechanical action, right? And how does it impact at the genetic level, at the quantum level, what they're defining as quantum, which is just at the energy level, down at the subatomic level is what they're really talking about. Further research and studies are needed to implement the knowledge of the two fundamental sciences between biology and physics. And the real, I guess, crux of this is this. When you look at thermoacoustics, electroacoustics, photoacoustics, those things are very well known and very well studied and very well applied in the medical industry. And you can find information galore about what they can do with that stuff. And through that information, you will learn that it can image with high resolution, and it can start manipulating the morphology of cells, the expression of genetics, and the mechanical construction, if you will, of cellular components and or the overall cell itself, and then ultimately organ systems. And it's all done, in this case, looking at it through this lens, through mechanical resonance, which can be done with electromagnetics, it can be done with light, it can be done with ultrasound. And it's a huge deal because all of these things also enable communication at the same time. And all of these ideas fuse together. How do you measure what you're doing to people all the time? You have to have a connection to people all the time. The network has to be connected all the time so that when these other systems are running, you get a feedback loop to understand what you're doing in a real live environment. And the world is a giant petri dish, in my opinion, at this point. The rule of law has been cast to the wind, and without serious intervention, I don't really think there's much time left, folks. And I know that sounds grim and bleak, but the reality is there is a quote unquote market correction a coming. And whether we do it ourselves or it's done by nature, look at what we're doing to ourselves. Look at what we're doing to ourselves. And I'll stop with that.
We don't have much time left, honestly, but I think that people need to make up their mind how they want life to be, and whether they want it to still be completely their own life, or whether they are, they're just so hypnotized or entranced or seduced by being part of all of this stuff, or they're somehow coerced into it by the promises of, oh, well, this is going to be therapeutic, this is going to help you, this is going to be this, that, the other thing. The bottom line, to my view, is we really don't need as many therapeutics as they try to sell us. And let's take a look at how, for entertainment purposes only, the pharmaceutical therapeutic industry has worked out for us. They have perfected the method of keeping people borderline sick but not really healthy in every way, psychologically, spiritually, and physically. So that hasn't worked out real well. So, and if we can't see it now, I think some people really don't see it very clearly, and they've become dependent on that system almost because they didn't take back their own power, or they didn't take back the responsibility for the state of their own physical being and all of the rest of it, the psychological, physical, spiritual. And if we don't do that, then all of that personal autonomy is going to continue to be eroded and eroded and eroded more and more. We might have reached a good point to conclude here,
I concur, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, we've had a phenomenal chat out there tonight with everybody, and I don't know. Let's team up on trying to offer just a few words of hope. There really is hope. The greatest.
I'll give you hope right now. I'll give it to you real simply put. This technology is a tool set. And the bottom line is this tool set going to be available to a few, or is this tool set going to be released and a new renaissance enabled so that humanity is able to build what it needs to build with whatever time we have left available to us to ultimately get us somewhere else so that we can diversify our assets, which ultimately is our progeny, which what I mean by that is our children, which is what's being attacked at every level right now with scientific specificity. So it's really, really simple. This technology is coming online. It's happening now, whether you like it or not. The question is, how is it going to be used? And what are you going to do to make sure that your children or your children's children have a freaking future that they have some say in? Because whether they make it or not, alive or dead, right? That's one thing. The next piece is, are they in control of their life? And I can say to you this about that. More and more people are starting to discuss this notion of networking people onto the internet using genetic-based systems. And if that ever catches fire in the mainstream, it is over. It's over. And from the ruins of that, there will be opportunity, I think, to put technologies out there in the hands of those that are willing to take the risks and be in the pioneering stages of our evolution if we make it past this decade. Yep. To do things like, hey, dude, you're going to Mars for on a 100-year trip. You're going to go with these people, and we know that the first round of procreation is good because all of these relationships are here, they're existent, whatever. But as you go, because we really haven't mastered cryogenics yet, and we haven't really publicly disclosed that we're growing humans, so we're going to send you astronauts 100 years, right? So after that, you have to have a certain number of people so that you have enough in the gene pool to not really start screwing everything up, right? So Imagine that, only you're going out in space and you need all of these potentially beneficial technologies if they're used properly. And this is the unfortunate silver lining from all of this, that is our stolen treasure as a species. And now that this has been done, what is going to happen? What is going to happen with this treasure? Are we just going to hand it to a few and die, or are we going to demand that accountability is had and the appropriate meetings are held, and we move forward as we need to move forward under the rule of law as a republic, as a global community, but first and foremost as an American republic.
That was a profound statement that you made. That heritage, part of our heritage is technological. It's actually part of our true heritage. It's not about the technology. It's a tool just like anything else that we've made throughout the history of humankind. It is what the real issue is about who's at the levers of control. And you know how many of us have mused about, especially over the last few years, of, internet censorship and all of this stuff, squelching of free speech. Ultimately, it's all about education, and it's ultimately about we are people we outnumber them drastically, and we have huge power, but we have to keep educating ourselves. It's essential. We don't need to know all the details like these engineers do. We just need to be fluent in the parts of it that are like the bottom line. All right, that's it. And we just, guys, spread the word. We're putting our material up on other platforms now. And we're going to break it up into small subject pieces so that you won't have to spend. I really love that everybody's spent this amount of time with us tonight on this show, but we're going to be breaking it up into smaller pieces by subject and make it easier for people to get little a la carte servings of it. It's going to be good. And it's education, and awareness, and just, helping to empower people and not feel helpless, not feel like they just because they don't know about all of the technical stuff that's spouted by these PhDs who are brilliant, that, just kind of makes your eyes glaze over because they're using big words. It's not that bad. It really isn't. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
See you next week.